Ooh, the podcast champion, the man of tomorrow, the man that some call the sexiest man alive. Woo, how about that one, baby? I figure. So a couple points to this, what you're getting here. I figure since I'm losing patrons like there's no tomorrow, I know some of the reasons why, other reasons why I don't. I figure what the hell. I'll have some goddamn fun, and I'll do the kind of shows I like to do, baby. I mean, granted, I do what I want to do in life anyway, but I'll really just go full geeky. And something we haven't done in a long time, or it feels like a long time anyway since we've done one, is a good old-fashioned Sovryn top 8, where I will just, 8 is a completely arbitrary number, but I hate top 3 lists, I hate top 5 lists, and I hate top 10 lists, because really, that's a bit of a behavioral trickery that a lot of websites, and magazines and whatever else will do to you. There's really, they're just totally picking those numbers out of a hat. This idea of lists is really the behavioral thing. But anyway, since those numbers are meaningless, there's no reason for it to be a top 5. There's no reason for it to be a top 10. And arguably, most people do this, or most, shall I say, media outlets do this just to get people talking. You got to understand, I'm going to be more completist with you inside of my top 8. Most organizations, most outlets, like I said, they do a top 10 list, and they specifically leave out things on purpose, and that's so that you engage with them, right? Top 10 lists are just pure marketing and behavioral bullshit. All right. So, but that's not why I do them. I do them because I genuinely have a lot of fun, and I think it's worthwhile talking about. Sometimes it's just one or the other. It's really worthwhile talking about. Sometimes it's just for fun. This is one that's kind of for fun. And actually, it's not even my idea. This brilliant idea came from, as he's wont to do, my co-host, my Sovereign Tech co-host, Robin Freebeard, dear friend, and just, all around brilliant guy. And he had this great idea. He commented on a post on Patreon and said, it'd be really, he asked me if there was a couple shows that I had seen, pretty much. And this spawned out of my conversation about Buck Rogers on the Wednesday Q&A that I opened up with. And he asked me about a couple shows if I'd seen them. One of them I'm a huge fan of, and in fact will be on this list. The other I wasn't really aware of, and actually starred Courtney Cox, Misfits in Science, I think it was, or Misfits of Science. And he said, it'd be a great top 8 to do these shows that only went one season. And that's all. And that's what we're doing here. Our shows that just went one season. And maybe it's a sad thing that they went one season. But I'm going to do some, it's going to be a top 8. I'm going to do some honorable mentions. And I'm going to bring up also shows that should have gone one season and stopped. Or maybe shows where their first season was fucking amazing and then the show just more or less went off the rails. One could argue to some degree that Buck Rogers was that way as well. Buck Rogers in the 25th Century from 1980. That, in the second season, it just, again, Glenn Larson left. It went off the rails, even though the character of Hawk was really cool and that they did deal with some deeper issues, and it kind of became a Star Trek knockoff as to where in some ways one could see season 1 of Buck Rogers as a Star Wars knockoff. Regardless of that, that's a show where, admittedly, the first season is just magic and just pure dynamite. In fact, Robin had brought up, one day he and I are going to do a lot of shows together here in the future. At least that's my plan. I'll ask him about it. But anyway, my time is kind of, my schedule is ridiculous. But when that opens up more, then I'll do more of this stuff. Anyway, so because I know he'd have a hell of a top 8 for this, I'm sure. So yeah, Buck, he had commented how he remembered, because Robin's a little bit older than I am, and he had commented about how, he remembered watching them in reruns or, and everything, and that he remembered the show Buck Rogers being wildly popular at the time. A lot of these shows, especially ones from the 80s and so on. So to give some background here, first off, I'm going to say that this top 8 was probably the hardest top 8 I've ever done. When I really started thinking about it and really started getting my mind churning on it this morning, I was like, oh, wait, I can't just do 8. There's no way. There's so many shows that only went one season that were incredible. You know, I mean, they were just so much fun and so great, especially in the 80s and early 90s. There were a lot of them because at the time, you know, like networks were you know, fairly more, they're a little more experimental with what they were doing, which is really cool. Like there was a great show with Rick Springfield in the 90s that a lot of people don't remember, unfortunately. Like Human Target from 1992, which was actually based off of a comic book, a DC Comics comic book. And, you know, most people don't remember that, but that was a hot one back in 1992. Anyway, you know, there's so there's so many that were really, really great. And often now, save maybe one particular network that I can think of, which we'll talk about a little later, they're not so experimental anymore. In fact, everything today just really feels like a cop show. And I mean, like a literal working for the government cop show. And that's fucking annoying. Not to say that a lot of shows, you know, throughout the past few decades haven't concentrated on some kind of government organization and, you know, the heroes like working for the government, be it the police, be it the CIA or whatever. I know that that's been kind of a name of the game. And look, if you can't watch a television show because the heroes are working for the government, you're not going to watch much TV. Now, that might be a good thing. I'd almost argue that it is. But you're sure as hell not going to watch anything new. You know, we're not going to get everything like MacGyver, where MacGyver was working for the Phoenix Foundation, you know, which was independent or something. I mean, you think even of Knight Rider, where Knight Rider was the organization, and that was FLAG, which was the Foundation for Law and Government. So obviously it's not really anti-government, even though it's private. Though the Knight Foundation, well, actually, no, I was going to say the Knight Foundation had a better name to it, but they were still trying to get a government contract in Knight Rider 2000. But regardless of that, I mean, you're just not going to watch much. So if that's one of your metrics, well, there's not a whole lot to see. And it might point out the one show that I want to tell you, and I want to get it out front, that is not going to be on this list. And that is Firefly. I'm just going to say it. That show will not fucking appear on this list. It will never appear on any top 8 list of mine unless it's like the worst shows ever. And all right, sorry. Look, Firefly is not the worst show ever, okay? The deal with Firefly is that I have been hearing for years, going on, nay, a decade. I mean, well, it's not a decade yet, but getting there, okay? But for years, I've heard, oh, this is the most libertarian show ever. Oh, this is fucking amazing because it's, you know, and it's not. Like, Joss Whedon's no libertarian. You know, he's not writing any kind of libertarian work, whether unconsciously or consciously. You know, I mean, you read into it that it's libertarian, and that's fine for you to personally yourself read into it, and that's what you think it is, and you like it. I know a lot of people that are into like kind of the back to the land movement or whatever. They like Firefly, blah, blah, blah. And that's one where it's fairly anti-government, okay? But I would argue if you're into anti-government rebellious shows, there's far better. There's Blake 7 right off the top of my head that you could fucking watch that is vehemently anti-government. Like explicitly, expressly, without question. And it's all about, you know, a very small crew on a very interesting little ship going out there and taking care of business, you know, leading a one-ship rebellion. So, you know, Firefly to me is just patently boring. You know, so it's not going to show up on this list. I think that's the first show, and it's sad that the first show that anybody thinks of when they think of a show that went before its time or that only got a season and should have had more, they think of Firefly. And I just think that's nuts. You know, like I really do. And to say nothing of the fact that unlike a lot of these shows that really are rare gems that never got a second chance or never really had a chance, Firefly still gets comic books, encyclopedias. Like there's tons of Firefly content out there. In fact, it's almost ridiculous to say that it's just a one season show. It has become so much more. It has not become what people were hoping it would be, which is they were planning on it being the next Star Trek. Yeah, nice try. But not even a nice try. But yeah, Firefly is not going to make this list. I just want to get that out of the gate. But there is a conversation about single season shows and experimental TV shows that, you know, maybe that's why they only get one season. To have that would include Firefly in the conversation, okay? And we will get to that as we go down this list. The other thing I want to point out, kind of ahead of the game as we go down this list, that is a lot of these, I'm going to give you episode counts. as we go down the list. Okay. And again, we're only going to do 8, but I'm going to have probably a bunch of honorable mentions. But for the top 8, as we go down that list, I'm going to give you episode counts for these shows. A lot of these shows, and even the ones that'll end up as honorable mentions, are from a time, the 80s and 90s, where an order for a television show run wouldn't be 10 or 13 episodes like it is today. It would be 22 to 26 episodes, sometimes even more than that, per season. So after a fashion, if you're somebody that's only been into television, if you're a younger person, or I don't know, like your life sadly revolves around Netflix, you're used to much shorter seasons, and effectively then these shows, a lot of them really have like 2 or 3 seasons, right? Based upon length in comparison to the modern whatever comprises what you would call a television show, because what does TV even mean anymore? So that's an important thing to bring up, is that a lot of these shows, even if they got canceled after 22 episodes, a single season run, really they had more time to develop than most shows that might only get 1 season today. And certainly your average Netflix show. So that's an interesting thing to bring up. And it does show, again, a lot more of the risk that I feel like Hollywood and the entertainment industry was willing to take in the 80s and 90s, which is sorely lacking today. There really is not the same amount of risk, or at least not the amount of money put into the risk. Okay. One thing, for example, like a great show, in fact, that'll probably get mentioned at some point in this, Sense8. Sense8 is more or less a 1-season show, and it feels like a 1-season show too, right? Even though it has technically 2 seasons in a movie, it really does more feel like a singular season show. And that's something too, is that now, like, the way that shows are made is very different today, to where, there's almost an anticipation or an understanding that you're going, like they almost purposely seem to split these shows up. For example, also I want to make clear there are no animated series on this list. Otherwise, like Mega's XLR would probably be right at the top of it. But anyway, regardless of that, you think of like Voltron, right? Which is one of the few good things that Netflix has done. Very few. And Voltron, like, there's points where you get wildly differing numbers of episodes per season, and a lot of times it feels like, okay, no, that was actually meant to be a whole season, but they just kind of split it in half. That happens a lot today too. So even shows today that really should have a couple seasons, more or less should have 1 season. That doesn't mean that a TV series like that somehow there's some magic to having that 22 episodes, right? Because that it doesn't always work that way. In fact, a lot of shows would have a very successful TV pilot, would get ordered and greenlit to become a full television series, when maybe originally they had a different idea in mind, where it was going to be a couple of miniseries, but then they decide to turn it into a whole TV series. Then you have to fill in either 22 to 24 episodes. You have to fill that in with some kind of episodes and write scripts really fast, because originally you weren't planning on having a full season. You were just planning on, a few hours of television here and there. Back in the day, this would happen a lot in the 70s and in the 80s. Wouldn't happen so much later in the 90s. Kind of the networks would get wise to how they were spending their money more. Now they're so wise to it, they're pretty much doing everything algorithmically and making very safe television, that really doesn't do much of anything, or it becomes predictable, or predictable, or just like terribly formulaic. Like Game of Thrones is disgustingly formulaic, right? To the point that it's completely unwatchable. So much like what would happen with the music industry, where you used to have to come out, got to the point where you had to come out, a band or a singer would have to come out with an entire album. You'd have to find a way to fill in, you couldn't just do, an EP anymore. You couldn't just do 4 songs. You needed to fill in 8 to 12 or even 20 songs into one album, and you probably had to make a shit ton of filler. That can also happen with TV series. So some of these TV series, it was kind of a fluke. And maybe where it's really relevant, I'll mention it, but it's kind of a fluke that they would get a longer season. And so some of these like single season shows, if at points certain episodes feel kind of weak, it's really because they they had a matter of maybe 2 or 3 weeks where they had to fill in the episode run that the network was demanding. Like, okay, originally maybe they thought about 13 episodes, then the network says, no, you're doing a full season, 22. So they had to come up with like 10 scripts really fast. Right. And so some episodes come off kind of weird, but then there's like a core 10 or 13 that are really, really strong. So I'm not arguing. I'm not necessarily saying that 22 episodes is a good thing. I'm just saying that sometimes that gave more time for something to get fleshed out. But, certainly it can go both ways. There's other times where, it had to be, loaded with filler and you end up with a weaker show because of that. And in fact, not just a weaker show, but it may be the reason that the show got canceled entirely. So, the television business, the way that it's shifted so much in the past 40 years or 50 years, really, is a very interesting conversation to have. One I'm willing to have at some point, because I'm a bit of a connoisseur when it comes to both television technology, but also kind of the history of television. And this is a thing, getting to the connoisseur part. This is really the thing for me. You're going to notice that a lot of these shows are science fiction. Why? Because they're the ones that are, in my opinion, interesting to talk about, and where TV can really get experimental. Not that it can't do it outside of science fiction, but that's really where it seems to get that way, and where the more interesting things that would comprise any kind of like best of or top 8. That's why it would fall into that. Now, it's not all science fiction. Some of it's fantasy, some of it's maybe historical or something like that. But there's a lot of science fiction here. Okay. And again, that was a very popular thing as special effects, really after John Dykstra and George Lucas opened up the world of special effects for everyone. That changed what could be done in movies, but also in television. And so there was this real boon of, a very science fiction series throughout the 80s and the 90s. And there's again, it was so hard to do this list. It was so hard to narrow it down to 8 because I just start thinking of all the great shows that were out there. Star Hunter, Space Precinct, a lot of these that only went like one season, or Cleopatra. Which one was that? Cleopatra 2029 or something, like whatever the fuck that was. I mean, there's a lot of little shows, or like even a more modern thing like Almost Human, that had Carl Urban in it, that was done by J.J. Abrams, which was like the first TV show. It was a science fiction show, cop show in the future, but it was like the first time I think on TV that Bitcoin was ever mentioned. I think that was even ahead of The Good Wife. There's so many shows that I could have talked about, and there were a lot of shows also that maybe went 2 seasons that felt like one season, even though maybe it was like a total of 40 episodes. It felt more like it was a single shot. And it just had that overall gist of it was gone too soon. Like it was canceled well before it got to really kick off. Because let's be clear here. Even some of the consider some of the greatest television shows ever, not just by my opinion, but by most people's opinion. They would flesh out a top 10 rank of greatest shows ever for a lot of people. Take, for example, Star Trek The Next Generation. Star Trek The Next Generation, loved by people who are either diehard Trekkies or not, okay, didn't really hit stride until season 3. So a lot of shows that only went 2 seasons, in fact, it might be interesting to do a top 8 for shows that went 2 seasons as well, because it kind of falls prey to the same conversation. Like if only they had gotten that 3rd season, it could have gone through the roof, right? I think, for example, this was kind of a cop show too, but it was a damn good one and very clever. Time Tracks with Dale Midkiff. Phenomenal. From the 90s, went 2 seasons, was just hitting its very deep and serious stride, and season 3, I think, could have put it over the top. Or, for example, Superforce, something a little cheesier, but a lot of fun, a nice little 30-minute hitter. Okay, and that's rare too for like an actual serious action science fiction show that takes place in the future to only be 30 minutes a shot. Super rare. But Superforce could have gone, I think easily could have done a 3rd season and could have gotten really, really interesting, once it got into a 3rd season. Or Nightman by Glenn Larson, one of the last Glenn Larson shows to ever get produced. That was getting really interesting at the end of season 2, and the things they could have done after that with season 3 would have been amazing. So, there's a lot of shows like that where it feels like they only went for one season, and it's tough to remember them otherwise. But then there's shows that only went one season that, again, because of the long production, or like the production order of episodes being over 20 episodes or something like that, where it feels like, holy shit, that show was on forever, right? And you'd keep watching it in syndication and in reruns. So anyway, with all of that said, I just talked 20 minutes kind of, baselining or laying the foundation for this. Let's get into our top 8. Let's start talking about this. And where I can, I will mention if a show is like available either to purchase, or maybe it needs to be available on, maybe it's available like on YouTube, or maybe you just have to torrent it. And sometimes some of these shows are actually difficult to find fucking anywhere, which is really sad. But anyway, let's kick it off. And in fact, the first one is not really science fiction, definitely more of the fantasy or historical bent. And this was a show that was on Starz. It came out in 2011, around the same time that Spartacus had started and Game of Thrones had kind of kicked off. Starz was, and still to this day, is making some of the best television ever. Far better than anything HBO even dreams of, has wet dreams of, frankly. And sadly, most people don't watch it. Like, most people don't give Starz the credit. And again, this falls to the fact that, like, Americans generally have really bad taste. Camelot was a very slow-paced show, and from the name, you can guess what it was. Camelot was about, kind of the rise and reign of King Arthur. It started with a very young King Arthur, played by Jamie Campbell Bower, who did fine, but here's the thing. With Camelot, and I think it was a winner to call the show Camelot and not call it King Arthur or something like that. King Arthur was not the interesting character in Camelot. This is the moral of the story here. Okay, you had the absolutely tremendous Joseph Fiennes playing Merlin, okay, who had just come off of not just come off of, but, this is a guy who starred in an Oscar-winning movie, the like picture of the year, that being Shakespeare in Love. And he played William Shakespeare, or Francis Bacon. All right, sorry, he played William Shakespeare, one and the same. But anyway, he played Merlin and just he had such gravitas in that role. In fact, one of my favorite quotes of all time is from the show Camelot, where Merlin is teaching, Arthur as he's growing up and so on. And Merlin says to him, he says, you were told that knowledge is power. He says, no, knowledge is pain. And Joseph Fiennes, just with his eyes and his voice, as only he can deliver shit. Merlin really was a centerpiece of that show. Forget about Arthur, forget about all the other bullshit characters. This was about Merlin and one other character, that being Morgan Pendragon, of course, who kind of the quasi sister of King Arthur, played by none other than Eva Green, the absolutely stunning, beautiful, wonderful, hyper talented Eva Green. Holy shit. She was the whole reason between her and Joseph Fiennes is the whole reason I watched the show. The show where it failed, okay, I think it had a lot of tremendous things to say. Again, it was very slow paced, very methodical, and maybe was trying a little too hard to be like Game of Thrones, as to where, the show that would continue on with Starz, that being Spartacus, Blood and Sand. Spartacus was blazing its own path, being the most extreme television show, sex and violence and everything else, that had ever been done before. And the most twists and turns within its narrative. It makes Game of Thrones look like child's play. Camelot would try to be somewhere in between that, in between the extremes of Spartacus and kind of whatever nonsense was going on with Game of Thrones. And so it didn't exactly work, and they did not take advantage of Eva Green. I think maybe we saw, look, let's call it how it is, okay? And I say this with the utmost respect and, dare I say, worshipfulness. Eva Green has one of the greatest pairs of tits of all time. Just straight up, okay? And if you watched, 300, was it Rise of Athens or whatever, the sequel to the original 300, you know what I'm talking about. That sex scene, was that something. Eva Green is, just really, and they did not take advantage at a time when Starz was trying to be extreme, trying to bring on the sexy, much like Game of Thrones was, even though Spartacus was really ahead of that curve and doing it much better. they dropped the ball with Camelot. Eva Green, if they gave her 2 or 3 more sex scenes, that show would have went 5 years. Easily, on Eva Green's prowess alone, on her tits alone, that show would have gone 5 years. What a pity. So there's a beautiful foundation there. Now, it brings to mind, and we're going to get into the other shows. We have 7 more to go, at least. Okay. It brings to mind for me, granted, now, while if you watch this show now, and you can get it on DVD, I mean, it's available all over the place. Hell, it's probably on Netflix. And it only went like 10 episodes. I mean, very, very short run. For me, like, I fill in when be it movies, TV shows, hell, even comic books, even books. In my own head, I can enjoy things a little more. I've talked about this before, because I'll fill in the sex scenes. It's just the way I think. It's just the way I am. I'm a hypersexual individual, and I say that with pride, not with any derision. I fill in the sex scenes and all that stuff. So sometimes for me, like when I look back, when I go through my mind's eye and remember some of these shows, I remember injecting the sex scenes, right? And I remember them kind of being there at those points. And so sometimes I can remember things better than perhaps they actually were. And that is probably why I remember Camelot with a little more fondness. But seriously, objectively, Eva Green and Joseph Fiennes just made that show. You couldn't get enough of them, and there wasn't enough of them, which is probably why it only went 1 season. But I totally recommend watching that show. Again, it is methodical, slow-paced, but and you get left with nothing, sadly. At the end of the season. But hot damn, was that some cool stuff. I mean, I think you get a little bit of sexy with Eva Green, and that's honestly that's worth any amount of hours, just because she's something. Anyway, okay, so Camelot, there we go, from 2011, originally on Starz. Let's move on to another one. Now, this one is kind of interesting. This show came out in 1997, so I was 16 years old when this show came out, and I had just kind of started to get into more TV fandom and more completionist TV fandom, where like, okay, a new show is coming out. I am going to be a fan of the show. I am getting ready. This is before, the era of the old Doctor Who, of course, I loved, but, the new Doctor Who, which is horrible, before everybody, this is before people were making dresses that look like the TARDIS. All right, this is when genre fiction, as you would call it, be it fantasy, science fiction, whatever, genre or historical, genre fiction or genre television was still, there was a lot of it, but it wasn't something that was really taken seriously or respected, okay? So when this show was about to drop, I got really, really excited about this. I thought that this was really cool. Again, we're talking 1997, and that's an important year because the lead actor in this was a guy named Heath Ledger, who is no longer with us. But Heath Ledger, and most people don't even fucking know that Heath Ledger did this. Again, people don't have a sense of history. But Heath Ledger, this is before 10 Things, right? This is before 10 Things I Hate About You. This is before A Knight's Tale. I love that movie. Actually, I like 10 Things I Hate About You as well. Boy, talk about something. Didn't they make a TV show out of that went 1 season? What an irony. Anyway, the show is Roar. And this was on Fox, and it was a bit of a mid-season lark, okay? It just came, I think it started in summer, which usually that's when shows are taking a break. So this was kind of a fill-in show. I think it started in July of 97. Did not go long at all. In fact, it ended up running, I think, only 13 episodes. I think not even all of those were shown. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, 5 or 6 of those did not get aired. I think if you get the DVD or something, I'm pretty sure there's a DVD release of it. And there were a lot of books made out of this. But anyway, this show got attention. This was a show that was very, very interesting. It took place in 400 CE, and it had to do kind of with this Celtic tribe and everything, and they're dealing with Christianity. And it got really wild. The main villain, you find out, was the Roman centurion who was still alive that had put the spear into the side of Jesus Christ while he was on the cross. And this guy could see the future and was developing all these wild weapons. It was just this really far out show. Had a little Celtic magic to it and some other other things. Really, really interesting. A nice Irish rebellion against this horde coming in, in 400 CE. And yeah, just, I mean, a shit ton of fun. And kind of sexy, because like the Celtics are sort of like these woodland people, engaged in this rebellion against far more advanced weapons. Again, weapons kind of from the future, because this guy, this Roman, or he's not a Roman centurion anymore. He's kind of almost playing a Merlin character, but for the bad guys, is developing things and coming up with things from the future. Just a crazy show. If you haven't seen it, if you've never heard of this, I mean, Heath Ledger's top of his game, very young, one of his first acting jobs ever, but totally top of his game before he became a serious movie star in any shape or form. But it was half the reason I watched, went and saw A Knight's Tale and a lot of Heath Ledger's other films, even though I don't totally appreciate his role as the Joker. I think he kind of ruined the character. I mean, his performance was great. I'm saying that the writing, the style of the Joker in Dark Knight Returns was, I think, really killed what was a really great character beforehand and led to all kinds of other problems in pop culture. But that's besides the point. But I mean, the reason I wanted to watch Heath Ledger movies is because I was like, oh yeah, it's the dude from Roar. Yeah, we got to see this. And yeah, it's really wild fantasy show. Even though it laces itself with some real history. And it only went to, like 13 episodes. You didn't even get to see all of those. And I just remember it stopping in September and just being like, hey, wait, what the fuck happened with Roar? The show was great. And after the fact, I mean, a lot of these shows that I'm mentioning do have a cult following. But this is one that was actually like going to win some Emmys. I mean, it really, it had something going for it. And it's still recognized as being kind of revolutionary for its time, because shows like that weren't very popular, at least in the United States, certainly in the 90s and certainly in the late 90s. So yeah, Roar, you want to check that out from 97. So, all right, let's get on to another show. And you might be getting a little bit of a theme here, okay? You really might. So our next show at number 6 is another Fox TV series that only went one season. This one, though, got 23 episodes, and all 23 episodes ended up getting aired. Wow. This is a show so fucking far ahead of its time. Originally came out in 1995. I was 14 when this came out. I was definitely excited about this show. As much as like with Roar, and Roar came out around the same time as Stargate SG-1, where like I was finally into, okay, I'm going to get into shows from the very beginning, right? This is one where I got into it. I was really digging it from the beginning. It may have had more of an impact on my life than I'd care to admit, but I still watch it to this day. I still read the novels, the comic books. In fact, I have scans of the novels, which are fairly rare. At some point, I should probably put those up on the Patreon page. I got to get back into releasing a lot of the books. I mean, I've scanned literally hundreds of books that just aren't available in ebook format. I need to get back to releasing those. This show, you'll almost never hear it get mentioned by anyone in the industry. Ron Moore won't mention it. You could kind of go down the list, but this, of various people in Hollywood or in the TV industry, whatever, who won't mention it. And it's sad because I think the reason they don't mention it is they don't want you to know that they don't have any original ideas. That they're what you think is like an original attitude of like a bunch of amoral characters in science fiction and all these other things and like all these really dark aspects of sci-fi and whatever. When you think Ron Moore is the one that actually brought that to the world, fuck no. With his bastardization of Battlestar Galactica. I'm going to call it that from now on. Bastardized Galactica instead of Battlestar Galactica. Bastardized Galactica. That's brilliant. Why didn't I ever think of that? Why didn't anybody else think of that? Oh, because other people sadly kind of like the show. Whatever. Anyway, actually no. Bastard Star Galactica, not bastardized. Bastard Star Galactica. That's what we'll call it. All right. Anyway, this show from Fox, 1995, 23 episodes. Space Above and Beyond. Ooh, was this show something else? People, I can look back at this, having rewatched it. I mean, at the time when I was a young person, I just enjoyed the action, and actually I thought Kristen Cloak's character, Captain Vanson, I thought she was smoking hot, like smoking fucking hot. And in fact, she's great, and she's been a real stalwart for the show and like really trying to keep getting it restarted. I mean, I think even to this day, she still shows up in conventions and everything. Not that she's done necessarily a whole lot outside of it, but boy, I thought she was great. She's even been involved in, in like the novelization process and so much more. She's really something else. So, I mean, definitely a career, well, I hate to say, I mean, it's a career defining role, but also maybe like a career ending role. But a female character unlike no other, or that was real, I guess, more an archetype for what would come later. But oh man, this show had everything: conspiracy, a lot of battles, all that stuff. And that's kind of what got me into it. Okay, but I can recognize now, watching it and merely wanting to just see that awesome action again, that I go, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this is way ahead of the curve. Like, this show is so far ahead of its time. It's kind of depressing. Not necessarily depressing, but it's kind of like, it's really dark. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, a lot of serious moral issues being put into question and so on. I think people weren't ready for this. And I don't know why suddenly they were ready for this kind of television in, say, 2004, 2005, when, Bastard Star Galactica would come out. But they weren't at the time. I guess that's the deal here. And so the show did end up only going one season, even though it would have Fox seemed to try really hard with this one. Unlike as we continue down this list, like I said, you're going to start noticing a theme. Fox would try really hard with the show because they would have Coolio be a guest star. That couldn't have been cheap at the time. Coolio was the biggest rap star in the world, in 1995. They would even have, X-Files was a very popular show. They would have, I think David Duchovny would do a guest star role on it. I mean, they really tried to bring in the star power to try and get the ratings up somewhere. But it just didn't happen. The CGI, it would use CGI effects similar to Babylon 5, which would be running concurrently. And the CGI does look a little rough today, but I think it's still totally passable. And like the hammerheads, the starfighters in the show are so cool and very realistic. It is a militaristic show. It is a show that, like the hammerheads, like literally you have the United States Navy and, effectively the United States Marine Corps, and so on. And they are taking on this alien invasion by a race that gets called the Chigs. Actually, they give it another name at first, but I'm not going to repeat it. So the Chigs, I mean, the interesting thing is that, eventually as you go through the show, spoiler alert, it's only been out for whatever, 20 some odd years. The Chigs, like, you find out that the government actually knew that the Chigs were out there already, even though it seemed like it was a surprise attack that stopped a colony ship. And just like really, really hardcore drama in this show. Again, it was deadly serious and really, really dark. And I think you did have characters that were very much heroes in it still, which is where Bastard Star Galactica fails, because there are no heroes in that show. There's still heroes in this, but man, it's tough to call them. And you get there's all this wild backstory. This could have been a huge universe. That's where a lot of people say, oh, Firefly could have been the new Star Trek. No, Space Above and Beyond could have been the new Star Trek, because you had the AI wars that you find out very little bit about, but some characters involved were a part of. You have the in vitro soldiers, who are really this entire like test tube baby human race that was meant to grow up to be soldiers and everything. In fact, one of the lead characters is, kind of refused to be, to just be a soldier and everything, which is a really cool storyline, especially within a militaristic atmosphere. There's so much going on with the show inside of 23 episodes. I mean, I'm glad we got at least those 23 episodes, and this is one where the writers did as much as they could with it. But fuck, and you got to read the novels. The novels, the comics, they're all great. They all add into this lore. There's so much that could have been done with this. I don't think it's not a show where it has maybe the prestige, or it has a cult following, but it doesn't have the following where I think that a remake would be done. Maybe someone would, just because, I don't know, that's what Hollywood does these days. But I don't think you could do a remake, and I don't think that they would restart the show really in any way, as much as I still would love it. There's so much story. There's so much history to be told. The writers really, really, they went all Lord of the Rings with this shit. As far as like the amount of history and things to go into, this could have been just like one of the most epic franchises ever. and it just failed. Or, I mean, like it failed to pick up with audiences. And I think it failed to pick up with audiences because it was just too ahead of its time. Like it was just television that nobody was ready for. And what a pity, like with a lot of these shows, what a pity that it only got one season. If this one went 3 seasons, I think people would have been completely hooked and it would have totally changed television, just like Babylon 5 did. Babylon 5, even though people don't want to remember it, Babylon 5 created serialized television. Babylon 5 created where you have the giant story arcs. Yes, it did. I don't care what show you think you're watching that's not science fiction, that somehow you're like, oh, this is so amazing. They do these story arcs that go 3 seasons, and I can't believe, I mean, who's ever thought of television like that? Well, they thought about it in the 90s with a show called Babylon 5 that no one wants to remember, sadly. But, I make sure that people do. So, anyway, Space Above and Beyond could have been just as influential, I think, and this is on this list, this is one of the true pities that it didn't keep going, because this had, I think, of any show I'm mentioning, save maybe the one that's actually going to be at number 0. I'm going to cheat a little bit. Save that. This is the show that had the grandest scale and the grandest potential to be something really incredible, all the way to go to theaters, I think, in my opinion. And I know they were trying to make a movie of it at one point, but, obviously that time has passed. It's been 23 years now. So anyway, Space Above and Beyond, and again, you just watch Kristen Close. She's incredible. And I've met her at conventions and everything, and she's just a wonderful human being. It's really something. So maybe out of any on this list, this is the one to watch, because it's the one that would still really hold up, and I think other than the effects, would feel very fresh and very modern. So anyway, all right, let's go to our next show. Got another Fox show. Isn't that weird? Another show that aired on Fox. In fact, someone got fired over this show because hot damn, like they botched things up. In fact, they got fired directly by Rupert Murdoch, of all things, which we all know how much we love Rupert Murdoch, don't we? Anyway, the show is from 1994. Again, a lot of these shows are from the 90s because, again, television was being pretty experimental. Network television certainly was, trying to combat, I think, really cable's, rising dominance at the time. You got to understand, in the 90s, not everybody had cable. It wasn't as pervasive, and I know there's still places that don't have cable today, but not everybody had cable television at the time. And you didn't have to be living in the sticks to not have cable television. Just look, not everybody fucking had cable television. And so network television, I think, was trying to combat that, and they were coming up with very experimental things at the time to do. And so certain networks, might have been having a lot more fun than others. Also, it's important to keep in mind that Fox, especially in 1994, Fox was barely a few years old, and arguably only had a couple big hits for itself, as to where the other established networks, ABC, NBC, ABC, and so on, had tons of shows to look back upon. Fox was really trying to, differentiate itself from the other major networks. And, so there's a lot of reasons why there was experimental shit being done at the time. But I mean, Fox had Married with Children and The Simpsons. Like those were its lead shows. At the time, and they needed something more, and they were doing shotgun approach, I think, particularly at the time. But we'll talk more about that as we go on. Anyway, the show was called Fortune Hunter from 1994. This is a show, had 13 episodes filmed. You can see most of those. You can find them on YouTube. I know that most of them you can find on YouTube. I don't think there's ever been a DVD release. In other parts of the world, they have aired the complete 13 episode run, but in America in 1994, 8 of the 13 episodes were never put on television. Now, Fortune Hunter starred Mark Frankel, who is going to appear again on this list. I think Mark Frankel was, because he died in a car accident not long after, I think before the year 2000, he ended up dying in a car accident, a motorcycle accident, not a car accident, because he raced motorcycles, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, this guy, Mark Frankel, I think was just sexy as fucking all get out. I mean, just a sexy, sexy man. Hell of an actor. Hell of a delivery. Fortune Hunter feels very much like a privatized James Bond. okay, is to where the character isn't necessarily engaging in espionage so much, but he works for a company like the Intercept Foundation or something, and he's trying to find, he's going around looking for whatever treasures that he gets hired, and obviously he wants a substantial fee for that. Now, I mean, he was like an ex-government agent, but I always think that's like kind of a cool story. That doesn't necessarily make it libertarian, but anyway, yeah, it was the Intercept Corporation that he was working for out of San Francisco, and it was a really cool show, very sexy show. In fact, if you go way back in Sovereign Tech's history, in the history of the Sovereign universe, the very first time, I guess it was the second round of interstitials, of segment intros, where I would have the fictional aspects, to be the character of Agent Sovryn, where the first one where he meets Elizabeth, right? And he says, "Hooray for the bellboy," where Agent Sovryn says, "Hooray for the bellboy." That is a line lifted right from Fortune Hunter, from like the first episode of Fortune Hunter, because I just fucking loved this show. Mark Frankel played a character named Carlton Dial. What a great name. And it was just, again, very sexy, good action. You can watch the shows on YouTube. A lot of them. And I still think the show actually holds up, and it's just a lot of fun. Very cheesy, grant you, but a lot of fun. And what would happen is they would end up putting it on Sundays. It would air, new episodes aired on Sundays at 7 p.m. right after football. That's a dead man's slot, okay, especially in the 90s. Anytime you're either before football or after, you're just asking for a show to get canned. And in fact, the president of Fox Entertainment at the time, Sandy Grushow, would get fired by Rupert Murdoch himself. And there's interesting conversations to have around this, because she put Fortune Hunter at that hour. This is before Fox Sports was the monster that it is today. Okay, you got to understand that they were competing with other networks in this regard. And did Rupert Murdoch not like the fact that that this show ended up having to get canned or something, or because it was an expensive show? Like, if you watch it, the effects might look rough today, but this was not a cheap venture on Fox's part. And so for it to fail so hard, someone was going to get the axe, and it ended up being the fucking president of Fox Entertainment at the time. That's how big a deal, that's how much they were banking on this show. And I mean, I remember they were advertising the fuck out of it, and that's part of why I watched it. But I thought it was so cool because I was a fan of James Bond then, the Timothy Dalton James Bond. I was never the biggest fan of the Sean Connery James Bond. I didn't really like that. But Timothy Dalton, and going into Pierce Brosnan, loved that James Bond. And really, I think, actually, I feel like Mark Frankel, like I said, if he was still alive, he could have ended up becoming the future James Bond. Like, I could totally see him taking the place of Daniel Craig or something like that if he kept going. He had the look. He had everything going for him. Again, he just died. He died like in his 30s. I mean, way too soon, But anyway, Fortune Hunter, if you want to have something that, is nice privatized espionage action, there you go. I couldn't think of a better show, quite frankly. So anyway, that was another one from Fox. And let's get on to our next series here, and that puts us at number 4, which Fortune Hunter was at number 5. Here's number 4, and number 4 is a show that was on in 2011. This is probably one of the latest entries as far as what makes the top 8. From 2011, a show that only went one season, ended up getting 13 episodes. All of those did air, fortunately. Was actually made by a libertarian, an actual libertarian, that being Brandon Braga, someone who I used to consider a friend. And really, really talk about something that had a high production budget, and it aired on, can you guess what network? Just toss it out there. What network do you think that this show was on that was really, really a brilliant show done by a brilliant guy? Brandon Braga, of course, was in charge of Star Trek for fucking ever, for like 15 years. I mean, if you want to thank some things in Star Trek, if you're thankful for Star Trek, Next Gen, Voyager, DS9, and so on, even though Ira Stephen Burr was mainly in charge of Deep Space Nine and Enterprise, you can thank fucking Brandon Braga. I mean, that guy was was really the helmsman of Star Trek for a long time, even more so perhaps than Rick Berman, and was married to Jerry Ryan of all things. Woo. So anyway, where was I going to go with that? Anyway, I was going to say, I mean, can you guess what network this is on? Did I tell you already? I don't remember. Fox. This show was on Fox, made by the guy who steered Star Trek. I mean, you couldn't get a bigger name on television, or a more trustworthy name, perhaps, at the time, than Brannon Braga himself. Steven Spielberg attached his name to it. This was going to be a big fucking deal, and it was just coming off of really the hotness of Avatar. James Cameron's Avatar, and it would go on to actually star. Actually an actor who was in Avatar who played the villain, that being Stephen Lang. He would play the commander of Commander Taylor in it. But basically, the premise of Terra Nova was that humanity in the future, in the somewhat far future, fucked up the Earth just too much, right? I mean, it's a whole environmentalist message. Okay. And instead of going to another planet, the way that they find out to save humanity is to send them back in time. But they send them back to like the Jurassic period, where there's dinosaurs and everything. Really, really wild concept. Okay. And so, the name of the colony is Terra Nova, as in New Earth. And so they send so many people back, and then there's a ton of intrigue around that. And Stephen Lang's character has a son who's like, I don't know, he went nuts, and he's trying to prove something about time and everything. And anyway, there's all this interesting stuff. There's dinosaur battles that happen within it, and you have this awesome little compound that, the actual kind of the city or state of Terra Nova that people live within and everything. Real survivalist thing. But, you're out in the middle of the woods of dinosaurs, but you have all this high technology. I mean, just on that abstract premise alone, it was such a cool show. But you could tell that they were really building up a lot of stuff. There was mystery and intrigue getting developed especially around the character of Commander Taylor's son. And we never got the payoff with that. We just never, ever got the fucking payoff with what was happening there. There was obviously going to be some kind of conspiracy involved. Could have been really, really interesting stuff, but it never got the chance. It ended up only going one season. Why did Fox cancel it? I mean, at first it had good ratings. Apparently the ratings kind of fell off later on, but not by much. I mean, in certain demographics, like this show was huge. It was like the number 2 show, in the U.S. When Fox decided not to continue it, probably because of money, this wasn't a cheap show to make. They tried to option it off to Netflix for them to pick it up and do a second season. They really did try to sell it off to other networks. I think they knew that there was a real winner here. And obviously they probably wanted to sell off a lot of the props and everything, to try and recoup some money from this. But it was too expensive. Obviously, for whatever reason, didn't fit in their budget or something. But Fox was... We'll keep talking about Fox here in a second, but Fox was a little kinder with this show, with the ending of this show, where they did some interesting things, where they did like a motion comic when you bought the DVD that would kind of continue the series. I've never seen this motion comic, but even giving some kind of continuation and closure is almost unheard of for Fox to do. It's very interesting that Terra Nova, I'd love to hear the real reasons why Terra Nova got canceled, because it was a great show. The ratings were largely great. I mean, they taper off a little, but not by much. And to only do a 13 episode, like it's ironic too, because this is at the time where 22 episode seasons were still commonplace. And so for them to kind of fall away and only do a 13 episode order, it had to be money. That's the only thing I could imagine, but it had everything going for it. The acting was tremendous. Music was great. You had Brannon Braga helming it, who, just a brilliant guy. They dropped the ball, with this one. If in fact, a lot of what people say about Firefly, besides the libertarian aspects, I more attribute to this show. This is the show that everybody should have been excited about. Or same with Space Above and Beyond, really. But this is the show that everybody should have been excited about and should have been like, hey, wait, what the fuck? Why is this canceled? Blah, blah, blah. Like, wow, this really could have gone places. Fox, what the fuck are you doing? And again, that's does appear to be a bit of a running theme, doesn't it? So, all right. Anyway, yeah, Terra Nova, dinosaurs and advanced technology. How can you go wrong? Let's go to number 3. We're in our top 3 here now. This is one huge fan of. In fact, this is like one of the first TV shows I ever bought on VHS, mainly because at the time, this show only ran 8 episodes. And in fact, not all of those aired on Fox. Yes, it's another Fox show. You're feeling it now, aren't you? You're feeling it. You're getting the picture, right? Kindred the Embraced from 1996. This would only go 8 episodes. So a box set wasn't a crazy thing. Like, back in the day, they would sell box sets of entire seasons of shows, but it would take up, like, it'd be a shelf in itself. Like you could put, like, I remember the Highlander VHS sets, which I bought. You could use those as shelving. You could lay them on the floor and you could put your drinks on top of it because they were huge. These giant box sets, because tapes could at high quality, not high definition, at high quality, not HD, HQ, you could only put a couple hours on a tape. And so at the time, when shows had 22 to 26 episode runs, just imagine the size of VHS and how many tapes that would take, right? So it's pretty crazy. But Kindred the Embraced, you could buy it. It was only on like 3 VHS tapes. But the other reason that I bought it, and because I actually didn't watch it when it was on TV, this is one that I watched, that I checked out on VHS. Now, the reason that I was willing to pick it up were 2. One, or actually were 3. One is that Kindred the Embrace is based off of, the Darkness universe or whatever that White Wolf created with Vampire the Masquerade and so on. It's completely based upon that series of role-playing games. And I am a big fan, of that. I used to be. I haven't played it in literally forever, but like literally, like as in infinity. It's been infinity since I've played it. But I loved it. The video games, now we're talking for Vampire the Masquerade. Fuck yeah. Bloodlines, please. So anyway, Kindred the Embraced would be based around White Wolf's universe. And it was a very complex show, very complex. But that's the first reason. Second reason that I watched it was, oh shit, Mark Frankel's in this. The guy that played Fortune Hunter. Oh, I want to see that. Right? That's what was going through my mind. But then the real cincher, but then I'm like, come on, a whole TV series on VHS. We're really going to do this right now, $50. I mean, not that was a huge deal, but, then I see Stacey Haddock is in it. And holy shit. Then I just picked it up. In fact, I remember my buddy Spock was with me. I said, oh my God, Stacey Haddock's in this. And I just looked at him. And I walked right towards the front counter to buy it at Saturday Matinee. She's not the sexiest woman alive. I know who the sexiest woman alive is. Okay. It's not her. But hot damn. She's sexy. She, of course, played Lana Lang in the Superboy television series. She just has those like ice blue eyes and that red hair where you just, and in that pale skin where you just go, what the hell? Like, it's this, it doesn't even look human. She is an absolute uncommon beauty and a tremendous actress. Man, she would of course she would be in Sequest, right? In Sequest DSV in the first season. We might talk about that in a second. But she was in it. She played Mark Frankel's character's love interest in the show. And again, a very, very complex show. Very complex. Inside of 8 episodes, so much is going on. And it was pretty much, you were more or less doing vampires with Melrose Place. That was the basic idea. Kind of the Godfather in Melrose Place. It was very much a mafia show, even though it's all about vampires. There's so much that happens inside of those 8 episodes. I cannot recommend watching this more. This is one that has a major cult following for it. Constantly gets re-released on DVD. I don't think it's had a Blu-ray release, but has a lot going for it. It was Mark Frankel. I think it was his last work before he died. Stacey Haddock hasn't really done a whole lot after the fact, and just a really intense vampire show. And I love vampire stories and vampire shit. Like, I mean, I'm crazy about it. And this certainly intensified that all the way because it was a very sexy show. In fact, I mean, I can remember vividly a scene where Stacey Haddock is wearing, pretty much lingerie in bed and just getting up after, stooping kind of the lead vampire. And like, oh, hey, all right, I'm on for this. So Kindred the Embraced, again, if you can dig some like mafioso style stuff with vampires, you've got an absolute winner here. But Fox ends up canceling, and it was produced by Aaron Spelling, you know, the guy that did Melrose Place and 90210. You'd think this guy couldn't do any wrong, and they still ended up canning it. What the fuck? Well, now that we're, you know, letting the cat out of the bag, now that we're at the point where there are no other Fox shows on this list, let's talk about this. Include Firefly if you're actually a fan of that show. The bulk of this list consists of Fox shows. In fact, like, I guess, so we have 8 of them. Only two out of this, or only 3 out of the 8. So 5 out of the 8 are Fox shows. What is the fucking deal with this network? And it's not like it was just something going on in the 90s. Terra Nova was in 2011. That's just 7 years ago. That's really not that long ago. I mean, that's just a skip from when Sovereign started. It is so fucking, like, I want to find out what the deal is with, I mean, you know, we know somebody got fired over Fortune Hunter. The fucking president of Fox Entertainment got fired. But what is the goddamn deal? These people set up, you know, Fox will fund, will greenlight some of the most brilliant, experimental, genius little shows, fun, sexy shows. I mean, I can think of some other ones. Dollhouse, that went 2 seasons, thankfully. But I mean, like all these shows, and they won't keep going. But then we can get Buffy the Vampire Slayer for fucking 12 years. not that I'm knocking Buffy, but please. Like, it's not even close to the quality and the ideas and the depth and really where so many of these shows could go. What the hell, Fox? I get it, people are hot and bothered about Firefly, but fuck, there's a laundry list of shows that they, and they're the only ones, they're the ones that keep canning these shows right and fucking left. I mean, you could say, well, at least they fund them. You know, at least they greenlight them, and ABC and CBS and NBC probably don't. Sure, I could understand that, you know, I guess that argument. But goddamn, like, I'd almost rather you didn't. So I didn't have to go through my life thinking, oh, fuck, you know, Space Above and Beyond could have been goddamn amazing. That could still be running today. I don't get it. I don't understand. You know, I mean, what is the thought process at Fox? Now, I'll tell you something. It could be, I don't know this. It could be as simple. There could be some kind of grudges. I don't know what's going on there. You know, something, none of these shows were actually a part of this because most of these, some of them that I mentioned were part of, there was a syndication package back in the day. This became a thing in the 90s. Like, you had it was Action Pack, which would have Tech War, which I think Tech War, more or less, that's a show that could get on this list from the 90s, because that had like 4 movies, and then they had a TV show because the movies were really popular, obviously partly because William Shatner was in them, and of course the books Tech War the tech novels were written by William Shatner himself. You know, he had some real star power there, you know, as far as that goes. But anyway, that would be part of Tech War, would be part of this like entertainment package, this show package that I think they called it Action Packed at the time. There were other ones. There was one called PTEN, Primetime Entertainment Network, which Babylon 5 would be a part of. I think Superforce would also be a part of that as well. There'd be other shows, Point Man with Connie Harper, you know, a bunch of other ones. Or there'd even be like little pilot movies like Island City. That was amazing. But, you know, that's another top 8 to do. Top 8 TV pilots that never got turned into a full series. We could have that conversation, like with Jason Hartley's Aquaman from 2006, right? Island City would be another one of those, which I think was from 94. There was that very rare Lost in Space pilot that was made in the 90s that nobody remembers except for me. But that was leaps and bounds, just in 2 hours, better than anything Netflix ever produced. But yeah, total honorable mention to Tech War. But my point in bringing this up, somebody, okay, and whatever company would put these together, like I think Action Pack might have even been put together, but like by NBC before they owned USA, or however that all worked out. PTEN was specifically run by Warner Brothers. And the executive, the chairman of Warner Brothers right now, has some kind of, and I don't know the story, but I do know that this is a fact. He has some kind of weird ass grudge with any show that was made for PTEN. Time Tracks was also part of PTEN. Okay. And in fact, to add insult to injury, PTEN was largely syndicated on Fox. Fox is the one that took the chance with it on Sundays. And for whatever reason, the chairman of WB won't let anyone remake, won't release the rights, won't let anyone touch any fucking show that was a part of PTEN, that was part of the Primetime Entertainment Network. It is the weirdest goddamn thing. I know it's a fact. J. Michael Straczynski has talked about it. He says there's some kind of grudge there. Something fucking happened. And so this guy won't let, I mean, there's a reason we're not getting a whole lot of, because Straczynski only has the rights for movies to Babylon 5. He can't do anything with the TV show, but there's a reason that a lot of that stuff is never really getting, messed with or even talked about. And that's because this guy is just holding some kind of fucking grudge against whoever either sold that package or whatever the fuck happened with PTEN. Some of the best shows, in my opinion, ever were part of PTEN, part of that package. Okay, now it's like a network within a network. It's like a sub-network. That's what PTEN was. Okay. Motherfucker. I'm sure the story's out there and I just haven't found it. Maybe it's might even be on the Wikipedia page now. But weird as shit. And so, at Fox, is there some kind of could there be some kind of battle going on where this person gets allowed to actually greenlight the thing, but then there's a guy who just hates his fucking guts and so ends all these shows early, or makes it to where you can't even get all of the episodes aired even though they've been produced and made? Why even stop airing if you got the episodes, fucking put it out there, even if it's some weird ass hour, fill in the time. So weird. The television industry, there's so many personal battles and grudges that go on there that have nothing to do with ratings, have nothing to do with show budgets, have nothing to do with any of that. It can often be as simple as, this guy slept with my wife, God damn it, I'm going to cancel his show. Literally, that has happened. In fact, I think half the reason Netflix has been able to make so many shows, greenlight so many shows, and I mean, they've been weird about their money too, but I think that more has to do with the deluge of content that's just too much, and so on. There's not enough time. Netflix hasn't been around long enough to have the fucking, shall we say, family history and blood grudges and whatever else that the rest of the networks, CBS, NBC, ABC, whoever have, and Fox, that they have. They just haven't been around long enough yet for that to happen. But at some point it probably will, and then you're going to see really weird decisions start getting made. Or maybe we're already at that point, and that's why certain things are getting canned. And the creators of these shows are often, they're NDA'd out of being able to even talk about it. They can hint at it, but that's all that they can do. It's such a crazy industry. So I don't really know what's going on at Fox, but Fox is clearly the most egregious character in all of this. And I mean, there are weird ass shows that would be on NBC that somehow they weren't half as good as the shows I listed off from Fox, but same time frame, coming out in mid 90s or early 90s or something like that. And they'd get fucking 4 years on network television. What the hell? Here's one. In fact, I wanted to go down. We still have a couple more to get to on this list, but I wanted to talk about one of the when I get to the segment where I wanted to talk about shows that should have only gone 1 year and not gone any further because the show just went all downhill. One of those is a show called Viper, which was about it's very much like Knight Rider. It was about a supercar. Unfortunately, you'd be working with the FBI, but whatever. Anyway, in Viper from 94, this show should have only gone one season because the main guy, the guy that played Joe Astor, who's the main character in it, who was a criminal, but then he converts to, he has memory loss and he converts to fighting crime and he drives a supercar, which is, a Dodge Viper, and so on. Once he left the show just stopped being interesting, but the show went 4 fucking years. They kept changing major casts and everything, and it went 4 years, 4 seasons. What the hell? The show was great in the first season, but the second season, it nosedived hard and it never picked back up, even though they'd get Joe Astor back in season 4, but by then it was just too late. And how does that happen? And Kindred the Embraced only gets 8 fucking episodes. It's not like it was, that wasn't even an effects-laden show. It wasn't even nowhere near as expensive to make as say Firefly or something like that. It was basically a mafia show. Just there were vampires in it. You didn't have to do much of that. The flying didn't have to look good. And it didn't. It doesn't make, I don't know what the hell goes on at Fox Studios or, at Fox Entertainment, but man, do they fuck shit up hard. You know, I mean, like all of these shows that were brilliant ideas that they really could have built on top of and could have helped them as a studio today. I mean, they just didn't have the foresight. And I think my personal opinion, there's just some kind of weird, like, internal civil war that goes on inside of Fox. And there's just a bunch of grudges and shit because it doesn't make any goddamn sense that some of these shows end up getting canned, and especially with the way they treated Terra Nova, like where they seem to give that a lot of respect. Just fucking odd. So anyway, let's move on the list. This thing's going to end up running 2 hours. Let's go to, well, number 2, that being, and this could have easily been number 1 as well, one of my favorite shows of all time. In fact, it was written by J. Michael Straczynski, who did my favorite show of all time, that being Babylon 5. J. Michael Straczynski did this. It was Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future from 1987. In fact, I've mentioned this recently. Almost every episode of Sovryn Tech opens up with me saying "Power On" in the beginning. That phrase "Power On" comes from Captain Power and Soldiers of the Future. That's how they'd end up getting their super suits would end up coming on. You know, we gotta build those suits, Brian. Sorry, not everyone's going to get that. Anyway, okay, so Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, this was designed to very much be a kid show. You can get this on DVD. You can get the soundtrack, which the soundtrack is absolutely tremendous. And now you can't get everything on DVD because this would have 22 episodes, but then there would also be 3 cartoons that were kind of like these tapes because Captain Power was a toy line that could interact with your television, kind of like the same way that the light gun would work with the NES with Duck Hunt or Hogan's Alley, right? It was the same concept, except, you know, you'd have like a starfighter that you'd hold in your hand that you can kind of pull the trigger on, and you'd have your character like Captain Jonathan Power inside of it, and you'd fly around and like when you'd see the screen flashing, you could shoot at it. You'd get points and everything. There's a little point scorer on the actual starfighter and whatever, like the XJ7. And it was a really cool concept, you know, but it was a cool concept as far as a toy line. It didn't really sell the way that they wanted it to. There was also a TV movie that they made, kind of a compilation TV movie. So there's more to this than just the episodes. But you had those tapes that had cartoon aspects to them. But the 22 episodes, this is some of the most deadly serious. Pretty much what happened is, and I love it when this happens, is that they handed over a kid show, not concerned whatsoever with, not paying. I mean, they wanted just to sell toys. So they let the production team for the show do more or less whatever they wanted, and they had very few guidelines. And so what happened is you got J. Michael Straczynski, one of the most opinionated and philosophical writers in Hollywood history, come in, and he sneaks in like all this really adult shit into a kid show, and this really epic and dramatic shit, and really dramatic shit, people dying, major characters dying, and so on. And it takes place in the future where after this war happens, where humanity effectively becomes almost like the Borg, where they get enslaved to this Lord Dread, but there's so much more underneath it. Just go to the Wikipedia page and read the plot, and you're just gonna go, holy fuck, that was a kid show. I mean, it was that nuts, like really, really cool stuff. In fact, little hint, my real name's not Brian Sovryn. Okay, it's Brian, but it's not Brian Sovryn. Most people that have listened to the show for a while know this. When I was thinking of other names to use, I was actually going to use the last name of Power. I was going to be Brian Power. Problem is, in the Free State Project, there was a guy who was rather well known, who his name was Brian Powers, and so I didn't want to get confused. So I didn't use Brian Power, but I would have. Because I love this show. I mean, I fucking love it. Hell, even the intro sequence throughout much of 2018 was totally based off of the intro to Captain Power. So, you're kind of seeing how the sausage is made here in a very real way. But Captain Power, Soldiers of the Future, it only went one season. It was set up to do many, many more. If the toy line kept going, very interesting things could have happened. Gary Goddard, who also made the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe movie, not the cartoon, but the movie, was backing this and did some really brilliant stuff. I'm not going to say that he's necessarily a good guy. There have been some accusations made about Gary Goddard, as well as one of his best friends. That being, what's his name? The guy that made X-Men. The movie, and Usual Suspects, whatever the hell his name is. Anyway, the director there, I can't think of it, and which is crazy. He also did Superman Returns and so on. What, or Brian something, I don't know. Yeah, like they're in a bit of hot water of accusations of like rape rings and other things. So I'm not going to speak so kindly about Gary Goddard. That's a recent development, but I've talked well of Gary Goddard in the past, but I'm not necessarily going to do that now. So anyway, Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, one of the best little science fiction shows you can ever get your hands on and watch, and you don't see it coming. It's a complete dark horse. But it's awesome, and everything looks really like kind of over the top futuristic, like the 90s kind of promised us, right? Where everything is armor and has pockets everywhere and all that, which I really wish that style took off in the future. It didn't. I'd dress like that all the time if I had the option. But you get to see a lot of that. It's a cool show. It's a really cool show. In fact, Sven Olsen, who best friends with Arnold and whatever, he had a great great role in it and everything. Oh man, there's so much to enjoy about Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future. Okay, let's get to number one. And number one was actually the show that my buddy Rob Freebeard had mentioned to me. He asked if I had seen it. He said, man, if you haven't, that one's right up your alley. And I was like, oh, no, baby. I have seen this. This is from 1982. I was only 1 year old when this came out. So how the hell did I see this? I'll explain why in a second. But the show is called The Phoenix. And this show, not only is it number one on our list, but it actually has the fewest episodes. That should tell you something, because I did go from more or less, I went from worst to best, or, not as great to great. Okay. With this list. And The Phoenix easily is the best show that I've listed off, in my opinion. There is so much potential. It was so much fun. It only had 5 episodes, so it's also the shortest of the bunch. 5 episodes total. It ran for about a month in 1982 on ABC. That's all. So how I saw this, okay, I'll explain what the show is, but how I saw this was the Sci-Fi Channel back in the day when it was cool, and it was actually called the Sci-Fi Channel instead of Sci-Fi, would often enough, either from the 2 to 3 hour or sometimes from the 4 to 5 hour, depending on what they were doing, they would show various series that would only run like one season. That would only have a few episodes. And so they couldn't make like a full block out of it and like advertise it. So they just made like this 1 hour during the day, during weekdays, where they would show you a show that was like that was rare, that only had like one season, and they'd have that rock out. And then like usually 3 to 4, they do Incredible Hulk, and 4 to 5 would be something else, or they do kind of like the Glenn Larson 2 hours where they would show an episode of Buck Rogers, and then after that they'd have an episode of Battlestar Galactica. I can't tell you in the 90s, in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, how many science fiction shows, rare science fiction shows, ironically not ones that I've listed off here, but ones that I might give honorable mentions to, that I was able to watch from the 80s and so on, and even the 70s, because the Sci-Fi Channel was just playing so much classic content. What a treasure of a time and of a network to allow for that. I know so much science fiction and history all because of the Sci-Fi Channel. They were really... At that time, the Sci-Fi Channel felt like it was real science fiction fans, passionate as fucking hell, that just did whatever they could to just get all of this great science fiction out there and just have something for genre fans to, sink their teeth into. And they did it with so much respect. It was a really magical time. I'm not kidding. In fact, overall, the late 90s in television hit a very interesting high note, because you wouldn't just have like the Sci-Fi Channel doing the amazing things that it was. You also had, like say wrestling was at the top of its game, right? With the Attitude Era, which, still wrestling has never replicated that success. There was so much going on with TV at the time. Yeah. Even this is when like TNT picked up Babylon 5. It feels like it was a time where science fiction was starting to get taken seriously. Like that networks were seeing, hey, we've got a gold mine here, and we're not tapping into it. We're not hitting those veins, and we need to start doing that. Or whatever. Other forms of extreme television were getting very much explored at this time, and it was just a real golden era. So anyway, that's how I ended up seeing The Phoenix, even though it was only 5 episodes. Obviously, the Sci-Fi Channel would not promote the fuck out of this for anything. I saw it pretty much as an accident. Now, they would run through the same kind of shows sort of over and over again. I think there's another show, was it called Mannix or something, where like a guy, that I think only went one season, where like it's a guy who was a cop who's living in purgatory now and all this. Maybe I got the name wrong, but I know that I got the plot right. But anyway, they would keep rerunning through these, and so you could see The Phoenix a few times over within a year, because again, it was only 5 episodes. You can find this on torrent sites. I've actually made a DVD out of it. You're not going to get high quality. It did star Judson Scott, who at the time was doing fairly well for himself. He had just gotten done being one of the lead one of the or pretty much he's best known as, was named Joaquin in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, who's kind of the second in command to Khan himself, to Ricardo Montalban's Khan, and did a great job in that. He would be in this. Judson Scott would also go on to be in V, the miniseries at the time in 1983, not long after this. I mean, Judson Scott has this look where he looks like otherworldly sexy. Okay. I mean, and I can admit that, I mean, I'm not that kind of guy, but I can admit when, hot damn, when a guy's got a look, he's got a look. And I think Judson Scott has a hell of a look. I think he's one of the sexiest men to ever walk the earth. Kind of like Stacey Haddock. He's got those crazy ice blue eyes. Not that I necessarily prefer that myself in people, but, I'm more of a brown eye kind of guy, but fuck, did he have it? And yeah, he did a tremendous job in this. This is very much based off of like the works of Eric von Daniken. This is an Ancient Aliens fictional show, okay, where he kind of he rises from his grave. He's playing a character named Bennu, who's an alien who looks human, of course, well, like I said, otherworldly sexy. And he comes out of his grave in Peru, and he's looking for effectively his mate. Very sexy concept in and of itself, but he's laying out like all of this philosophy, like kind of like this sort of Native American philosophy to all these people. He has these special powers where he gets powered by the sun. That's sort of where the idea of the Phoenix comes from. And I mean, there was so many cool things in this show. And he argued, I mean, inside of 5 episodes. But there are dynamite 5 episodes. Like there's a point where he's helping out. He's staying with this family because he's kind of like this loner kind of, which, would become this loner guy walking down the street would sort of become popular with Bill Bixby, in The Incredible Hulk, which was an incredible show. No pun intended, or no pun intended there. And so he would like stay with his family, and they were living in the desert, and they're trying to grow some crops or whatever. And he says, your grapes could grow here. Grapes can grow anywhere. He says, but they really need some purple. If you put purple window panes, the sunlight will allow the grapes to grow. And all these just simple little brilliant things that he would say. It was almost like an ancient alien MacGyver. And it was genius, and there hasn't really been an ancient alien-esque, ancient astronaut theory based fiction show really before or since. Not really. This is a very unique animal. But it's so cool. And Bennu, he's such a pacifist and everything. And I think that that's really cool. Not an odd character to come out of the sensitive 70s, but it worked. And I mean, he even had great, like I said, very interesting philosophical concepts. Like this guy's talking about buying up all this land and everything. And he argues with him. He's like, you can't. He's like, it's like, you can't own the land. The land belongs to itself. I mean, he had these really strong statements. And Judson Scott, being such a tremendous actor, delivered with such panache and authority. I feel that, oh man. I mean, I don't know what would have happened with the show. I don't know how much bigger it could have gotten. There are some scripts that people claim to have found where, they say, well, this is what the storyline was going to do. He would find his wife or his mate and they'd go and do this, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know, but I would have loved to have seen where it went. 5 episodes is amazing, but it's not enough. And there's so much and he just, I love it. Like he makes these little statements about history or something or science, and he never explains them. He just says it. And then the person looks at him like, wait, tell me more. I'm not going to say I know anybody that does that sort of thing, but But what a damn fine show for 5 little episodes. I'm pretty sure you can still find it on Pirate Bay. If I find out that people can't, I will make this personally available in some way to everyone, because I think it's completely worthwhile. So let me know if you can't get your hands on it, and I'll take care of you. But you try first, okay? Bennu would want you to. So yeah, The Phoenix from 1982, 5 little episodes, but a very unique science fiction show. You know, again, with that whole ancient alien, ancient astronaut theory aspect to it, and a lot of philosophy in it, and just a lot of interesting messages, you know, and some real world, like, great ideas, or not just great ideas, but tricks, you know, that you could walk away from the show and do. You know, it's where, like, with MacGyver, they had to, often enough, it was if he was like making dynamite out of a shirt button or something, they'd have to fudge some of the info because they didn't want people to actually go and make dynamite like that. But with the Phoenix, yeah, I mean, stuff that he laid out would seem to actually be true. It was interesting. So yeah, what a great little show there. So I'm going to wrap. Okay, so that's our top 8. Let me go down that. Then I'm going to give you a 0. But the top 8, number 8 was Camelot from 2011. Number 7 was Roar from 1997. Number 6 was Space Above and Beyond from 1995. Number 5 was Fortune Hunter from 1994. Number 4, Terra Nova from 2011. Number 3 was Kindred the Embraced from 1996. And number 2 was Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future from 1987. And then number 1 was The Phoenix from 1982. Now, number 0 is... This isn't going to shock anybody. And it's tough because, like, look, to some degree you could say the show actually went 2 seasons. But I would argue that it didn't. And most people feel that it didn't, because most people don't want to count what you would call season 2. The show has a different name, so it might as well just be a sequel show. It's not really another season, and it has a completely different, almost completely different plot line, and except for its last episode isn't interesting at all. The show number 0 is Battlestar Galactica from 1978. Such an epic, such a well-remembered, still remembered, and yes, it is, and will probably be remembered more kindly than its successor, made by Ron Moore, in the future, because this show was brilliant and had, actually, this kind of had little ancient astronaut theory aspects to it. And I know that Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica would too, at the very last episode. but the elements, you know, are certainly there with Battlestar Galactica, even though it's not as explicit as, say, with The Phoenix. What a Battlestar Galactica, I'm not going to talk about it much. It just has to be mentioned. 24 hours. I remember when the Sci-Fi Channel, again, was great, when it was the Sci-Fi Channel. They would often do on the holidays, like around this time, they would do what they called Galactathon, where it would, for 24 hours straight, because there's 24 episodes, they would play every episode of Battlestar Galactica in one day. And they had Dirk Benedict host it, who played Starbuck in it, another one of the sexiest men ever. I gobbled it up. I just watched the shit out of that. And I still watch that show over and over again. Easily one of the most watched franchises by me, not the new one, the 78, that first season. Galactica 1980 would come out directly afterwards. That show's kind of a joke, so I don't think that should count as a second season. But really, if there was a number 1 besides The Phoenix, Battlestar Galactica, if you count that as one season, that's it, baby. I mean, that's the one. It's Lauren Green. Everybody wants Lauren Green as their dad. Playing Commander Adama. Everything about it is just, it has an absolute magic to it. No matter how many times special effects sequences would get rehashed and reused, it just had a magic. You couldn't take your eyes off of it because everything just looked so epic and so amazing. I think in many ways it did Star Wars better than Star Wars. And in some countries around the world, Battlestar Galactica is more popular than Star Wars. So including France. But anyway, yeah, just love it and just had to mention it and put it out there. Some honorable mentions. Boy, there's quite a few. Earth 2 from 1994. That was on NBC. That show there was another environmentalist show, but where, a small group of people go to another planet to restart the human species. Could have been a sexy storyline. Wasn't very sexy, but was still very interesting. You'd get a great performance by Tim Russ, or I'm sorry, not Tim Russ. Tim Curry out of it. But phenomenal little show. Like, I mean, it was very hardcore science fiction, which was rare at the time. Anyway, because we are running into 2 hours, let me run through some of these. Thunder in Paradise from 1993. That was a very fun show. Had to do with a super boat instead of like a super car like Knight Rider or Viper. That had Hulk Hogan starring in it. It was part of his deal of going to WCW was that he would get his own TV show, get in some acting and everything. Certainly he was a big enough name at the time to do so. And a funny show. It only ended up going one season. It was actually made by the same people that made Baywatch, which was the biggest show in the world at its time, and actually still holds kind of a ratings record. But yeah, just a fun little show. Nothing. It's not something you'd watch over and over again, but I always had a good time when episodes would come on. The Lone Gunman, which was a spinoff from The X-Files, which had to do with those characters that most people know from 2001. That only went like 13 episodes. Fox canceled it. Not a surprise. Dark Skies, kind of an X-Files competitor. I think that was NBC doing it, but it took place during the Kennedy administration. That was an interesting show, very interesting show, actually. A couple here that were really interesting that the Sci-Fi Channel did, and this is when they first started getting into original programming, because before they never really had any outside of some documentary type shows. There was Mission Genesis from 1997, which had Nicole DeBauer in it, who just before she would go on to Deep Space Nine and play Ezri Dax. I loved that show. I thought it was very, very interesting what they had done with that. It was actually based off of a novel, kind of had to do with like young people that were getting away from an Earth ravaged by a virus. Really cool. Then there was Welcome to Paradox, which came out around the same year, which was also on the Sci-Fi Channel, but was sort of an anthology show, kind of a futuristic Twilight Zone that I thought was really cool, very risky. And they'd even have like Ice-T? Yeah, Ice-T would be in it, who now is a well-known actor, but at the time he necessarily wasn't. Ice Cube was an actor too. He was in Anaconda, right? But anyway, Welcome to Paradox, some really cool episodes in that. Only like 13 episodes, same with Mission Genesis, but that was fun, and it was interesting to have Sci-Fi Channel starting to get into that. And then another one, in fact, this is on Showtime. This is from 2002, was Odyssey 5, who was made by Manny Cotto, who would end up saving Star Trek Enterprise in a very real way, not from getting canceled, but from, but like really bringing it to its height. Because he ended up taking over for Brandon Braga in season 4 with Star Trek Enterprise in 2005. But he had done, kind of how he got the job with Enterprise was people knew him from Odyssey 5, which starred Peter Weller, and was a very, it almost reminds me of Sense8 before Sense8 was a thing, but it's hard to describe the plot. You kind of have to check it out. Anyway, it has to do with the guy who's an astronaut, and I like the show. The only thing is that it was on Showtime, so people were expecting, sex and tits and all that stuff. And like maybe they had it in the first episode and then that just disappeared. But I like Manny Cotto a lot, so whatever. Mantis, another Fox show, ended up getting canceled after one season in 1994. Actually had a TV movie, kind of a black, African-American superhero who had this super suit. And that was a really fun, very cool show at the time. You went way before its time. And then speaking of another great Fox show, The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. with Bruce Campbell in 93. Such a weird ass show. Great Western though, great ideas, hilarious, great action though, expensive show to make, very expensive show to make. But I think that was a show, another one way ahead of its time, too weird for everybody to really get, but I loved it growing up. I thought Briscoe County Jr. was so cool. But another one that Fox, just more or less said, fuck you, and ended up canning it. I'm going to just very briefly mention some Glenn Larson shows, which Glenn Larson made Battlestar Galactica, made Knight Rider. I mentioned Nightman. He made that. He's made so many shows, especially in the 80s. He made a ton. But there was Manimal from 1983. That only went like 8 episodes. There was Automan from 1983. That went a little bit longer. Those I think you can actually find on DVD. But he just had a string of really, really interesting stuff. He definitely had interesting concepts. Execution might have been something else. Like Automan was kind of ridiculous. It just looked like Tron. It was totally playing off of that, and I recognize that. I'm not saying they're great shows, but they are ones that they're certainly, the ideas are very interesting. Some other one, like Street Hawk, that's one that people forget from, that was like in 85. Street Hawk was really cool. It was pretty much the motorcycle version of Knight Rider. Only went one season, but I thought it was a lot of fun. Another one, this one's kind of newer, from 92. And good luck finding this, but it was another show that I kind of enjoyed. It was called Lightning Force. It actually had George Takei in it. And it was about like this elite military group and stuff. But at the time, I thought it was really cool. But that's a hard one to find, like almost any episodes. I think maybe I have a couple episodes of it. But I mean, yeah, again, good luck. So, one more. Okay. I don't know if you can exactly call this a one-season show, but V the series, not the one from 2009, the original from 84 with Mark Singer, Michael Ironside, the whole thing, was a great show. Of course, it was coming off of it got created because the two miniseries it was based off of were so popular, were so white hot at the time. V from 1983, and then, of course, V the Final Battle from 1984, and they would greenlight the show pretty much very quickly right after. V is a tremendous franchise, has sadly not getting made today when it has so much to say today, or could have so much to say today, even more so. Well, they tried to use it very politically in 2009, too, which... Yeah. Anyway, watch like the edits for like the previews for the next episode or something, and you'll get the idea. Like there were cracks at universal health care and a lot of other things, which with Obamacare coming in at the time in 2009, you could kind of see where that would be incendiary. It's a show that could really be used at any point to be very, very politically charged. It did only go one season, went 19 episodes, and there is a script for episode 20, which ultimately brought fruition, not conclusion, but fruition to the Star Child storyline within it, which was very, very interesting. Of course, V, everybody knows V. It's like the Nazis, but they're lizards and blah, which is ironic, right? Because they claim the Jews are, I'm not saying Nazis claim that, but people do. But anyway, Jane Badler, fuck, if I could watch her for 19 more hours, you bet your ass. I'm all about it. Yeah, such a great, and Michael Ironside, is just tremendous, right? He fucking what a badass. Mark Singer's great, outside of Beastmaster and all that. Mark Singer he came back and was going to be a character in the reboot of, the remake, I guess I should say, the remake of V from 2009, but that didn't keep going, even though I got into that show eventually. Like at first I'm like, this is sacrilegious. What the fuck are you doing? You gotta understand, V was a big deal to me. Like on my Converse shoes, I used red nail polish to put a V on the side of my Converse shoes when I was in high school. Fucking loved V. Sci-Fi Channel treated it like the biggest goddamn event ever. And it was, it was so epic. But yeah, a shame that didn't keep going. Of course, there's novels and comic books that were made for that. I have been scanning the novels for V for a couple of years now. There's so many to get. There's like 20 some odd one of those to get, and I've been able to collect them over time and keep getting them. But at some point I'll probably release all that because I think V is just so cool. But the TV show, some of the episodes felt a little weaker than others, and it definitely got way more Nazi, but for the bad guys, and it didn't have the same flair as like the two miniseries did, but it was still a lot of fun, still worthwhile. At one point, actually, J. Michael Straczynski, who we've mentioned a couple times so far in this special, in this top 8, J. Michael Straczynski was actually hired, and he wrote a script to restart, or to pick back up where V the series left off in the 90s. He was going to do that, and sadly that didn't happen. Kenneth Johnson did a sequel book called V Second Generation, I think it's called. Kenneth Johnson's the original creator of V, that came out a few years ago, and it's a tremendous book. It's great shit. I totally recommend reading it. So V has some degree of staying power. It really was, at the time, it was definitely a cultural phenomenon. So anyway, that's the last one I'm going to mention as far as honorable mentions. It was tough to say that was like one season because it did have two miniseries that were just fucking huge, like a couple of the biggest TV events in history. All right, so let's get on to, I guess what I want to mention is, we'll just wrap this up with shows that I wish did end in one season. Like, I wish they never went further. And I think that history would look upon them a lot more kindly if they had, only really, if they only had one season. I mentioned Viper, of course, already, where I think that show actually was pretty cool in its first season. In fact, it was competing with another show that I think was on CBS, Cobra, which had Michael Dudikoff in it from the American Ninja series. That he's kind of a badass guy. That went 22 episodes, for fuck's sake. Stephen J. Cannell made that, right? The guy with the A-Team. But I mentioned Viper already. Really, the two shows I'm going to bring up to you are ones that I've mentioned before, where I tell you, and I've said, their first seasons are serious as a heart attack and are just genuinely great, either action or science fiction or what. One show that almost made this part of the list was actually Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. But it didn't get bad until like the fourth season. And somehow they got 4 seasons. I guess it was just because everybody liked looking at Terry Hatcher, which, sure. But anyway, so Airwolf is easily, now that only had its first season was short. It only had 11 episodes or something like that. The first season of Airwolf is tremendous action, tremendous espionage, very serious political thriller. And it is. It's very serious political thriller. All about a super helicopter. You can't go wrong. As soon as they would bring in season 2, the character of Sweet Britches, as soon as they brought her in, and I'm not saying women ruined anything. I mean, it's the writers that ruined it. As soon as they brought her in, it flopped. Season 4, which was on the USA Network, was, even though it was a lot of reshoot or using a lot of effect shots from the previous 3 seasons, season 4 did a really cool thing of that where, well, first off, you ended up getting, John Michael Vincent's, his character Stringfellow Hawk, his brother St. John, who he's been looking for the whole time throughout the show, would end up coming back and he'd take over Airwolf, and you'd get what's his name, Grant Wynn Davies or whatever from Forever Night, would end up joining the cast on that and everything. Season 4 would kind of remix the previous seasons and turn them into much more serious storylines, and I like season 4, even though it had that problem where all the action in it had to take place within the framework of previously used shots. But I think that can work for a show. It obviously worked for Power Rangers. But yeah, season 1 of Airwolf, though, 2 and 3, very rough. Season 4 kind of made up for it. But season 1, fantastic. I mean, just fucking fantastic television. Some of the best television you can watch. Again, very serious. You had Ernest Borgnine was in it. I mean, Ernest Borgnine was was a huge actor that you could bring in for a show, and it worked. It really worked. So, yeah, that's one that I really wish at season 1 it just ended, because I think people would still be talking about it now. Of course, also there was a 1-season shot that was tried out with that being Blue Thunder, which was a movie that had Roy Scheider in it. The TV show wouldn't have Roy Scheider, but Blue Thunder was another super helicopter show, nowhere near as fucking good as what Airwolf was doing. It's almost not worth mentioning, but it was a 1-season show. Just like Logan's Run had a 1-season show, but it doesn't even compare to the 74 movie, which is one of the best movies ever made. Crazy. Anyway, the other show that I wish only went 1 season, even though, again, I actually don't mind season 2 and season 3. In fact, I actually love season 3, and it got cut short, sadly. But season 1 was so good. Sequest DSV, also starring Stacey Haddock, who we mentioned before. Season 1 of Sequest could have been the next Star Trek, and it just didn't happen. And they tried. They really tried. They gave it the college try, and it just didn't happen. Speaking of Roy Scheider, of course, Captain Nathan Bridger, captaining and designing the Sequest. Fantastic, hardcore science fiction, really hard science fiction, very peaceful in a way show. I mean, they'd fire off some shots here and there, but it was a scientific show. You had Bob Ballard doing everything. I've talked about Sequest so many times, I don't need to say it again, but I do want to mention, I wish that was one of those shows that only ended up having 1 season. Once again, I think it would be looked upon far more kindly if it did, because that first season was what science fiction should be, in my opinion. Just my opinion. So anyway, there you go. You got some extras at the end there, gave you a full list. I mean, fuck. I don't know if I should put all those in the show notes. I can add them later if you really want to see them, but maybe I want it all to be a surprise. So there's your top 8 shows that only had one season. I can't believe this. I recorded for almost 2 hours talking about this. I can't believe how hard this was. It was really hard. I'm like, oh, but they're all so great, for various reasons. Even that one I mentioned at the beginning, Rick Springfield's Human Target was awesome. And as I said, I really wish Buck Rogers only went one season too, but I think I said that at the opening, speaking of the opening. But yeah, a lot of stuff to really dig in. And the fun thing about these one season shows that were really cool is that you can watch them kind of quickly, right? Like you could binge watch these pretty fast and you're done. And then you have a really great, little education in history and science fiction and in fantasy and genre fiction or genre television in general. So check these out. I don't think I mentioned which ones necessarily were available on DVD or on YouTube or that you have to torrent, but look around. If you really want to watch this stuff, and I recommend that you do, most of them you can get through in a couple days, in a weekend, go for it. Have a good time. So anyway, that's it for this fun little top 8. I will see all of you on the other side.